Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 58 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks, in which the Sharks have lost 6-4. Now, this was a pretty crazy game. Obviously, just looking at the scoreboard, you see a 6-4 score, and you think, wow, that must have been quite back and forth, keep you on your toes, and all of those things are definitely true. But what is very weird about this game is how these goals actually came to be. This was not a game that was played entirely at even strength. The special teams played a massive part. In fact, this was likely the Sharks' most penalized game of the entire season thus far, emphasized by the fact that the Sharks are one of the teams who draws the least amount of penalties in the entire league. So the fact that there were 11 power play opportunities between these two squads was definitely very out of the ordinary. And here's the thing, both of these teams are very bad. They're right near the bottom of the standings. And one of the reasons they are this bad is because their special teams, amongst other things, are not very good, both on the power play and penalty kill side of things. And so with 11 opportunities here tonight, there was bound to be some real interesting results coming from it. And that's exactly what we got. The Sharks themselves managed to score 3 power play goals. That's 3 of their 4 goals in the entire game. Meanwhile, the Ducks got 2 power play goals as well, plus a shorthanded goal to make it a 3-3 breakdown in terms of special teams goals here tonight between these two teams. And so definitely a really interesting but also rather choppy game as well. Because of all the whistles and all the penalties called, you didn't really get to see much of a flow to this game. So while it was definitely exciting to see the goals going in on both sides, it was also kind of a difficult game to get into because of those stoppages coming oh so often. It's why this game actually ended up being a decent bit longer than most NHL games and most Sharks games do take, finishing even a bit later than most post-regulation games do. But jumping right into this now, we have the first period starting off. The Sharks actually got the first goal of the game, that one coming from Duclair rather early on to set these Sharks up for a chance to try and break out of this losing streak, finish this homestand on a strong note. But unfortunately, that didn't really hold on for too long. The Ducks would not only manage to tie the game, but also take the lead for themselves on that shorthanded goal from Leeson, and it would be 2-1 Anaheim by the end of the first period. In the second, it would be Killorn who would expand the lead for the Ducks to 2 goals before the Sharks would get 2 straight power play goals to cut the lead in half, and then also tie the game. And you're thinking here now 3-3, the Sharks might be able to wrest control back of this game. Not the case, as the Ducks themselves then end up with 2 straight power play goals very quick one after the other to make it a 5-3 Ducks lead at the end of the second period. In the third, it looked like the Sharks were going to make it interesting. They bring it to within 1, but as we've seen in the past, whatever reason, recently at least, when the Sharks are in a situation down by just a single goal, even if they're playing well in the third period, by the time they pull the goaltender, there's just nothing seemingly left in the tank. They can't get settled in the offensive zone, and it ends up being a Ducks empty netter that caps this game off and ends a crazy one 6-4 for Anaheim, which also gives them the season series victory here in this 4-game set between these two teams by a score of 3-1, which is technically, at the end of the day, a pretty decent thing. As I mentioned, both these teams really bad, both right near the bottom of the standings, and the ultimate goal is, of course, to be right at the bottom of the standings. So the Sharks, it is in a way in their best interest to actually lose these games to Anaheim, and that's exactly what they've done, still keeping a pretty sizable point gap between these two teams, which in fact is so important because the Sharks are 31st and the Ducks are 30th. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the top line of Duclair, Granlund, and Zetterlund. It's been a bit of a roller coaster with these players. In the Nashville game, they didn't start off particularly well, but the third period was really good for them. You were thinking they'd be able to carry that into the game against the New Jersey Devils. That did not end up happening. They were one of the worst lines for the San Jose Sharks that night. But then here, against Anaheim, not only do they come out the gate very strong with that early goal from Anthony Duclair, but they are one of the most effective lines for the San Jose Jose Sharks as well. And it is not just a situation where they're getting these great breakaway opportunity 2-on-1 types of plays, but they were actually establishing themselves in the offensive zone a decent amount of the times. In fact, this first goal scored by Duclair was off of some hard work by Zetterlund and some strong recognizing of Duclair to find the open ice to be able to get this first goal of the game, which was quite nice to see. But as I mentioned earlier on, there was not a lot of even strength play this game, and so a lot of the power from this top line came in the power play situations, and that is indeed where they shined. Duclair looking quite good in that role. Granlund, of course, picks up 3 power play assists, which is quite an achievement for him for sure, and Zetterlund also doing some pretty solid work as well. When it comes to the second line, we have Zadina, Eklund, and Cunnin. Now, focusing a bit onto William Eklund, who is, of course, still one of the more important players for the San Jose Sharks this season, considering he is their top prospect, at least who is playing in the lineup currently for the San Jose Sharks. In fact, he's practically their only forward prospect doing so at the moment. And he's also had a bit of an up and down set of games these last few days. The Nashville game was not very good. The New Jersey one, he finished off decent, or he started off pretty strong, but finished it off quite poorly. Here tonight, it was a bit of a slow go of it at first, but once he managed to actually get this goal and break out of the slump that he has been on recently when it comes to point scoring, you could see the confidence slowly return to Eklund's game, and in the third period, he was actually one of the better forwards for the San Jose Sharks, so that's hopefully something he can carry forward. It's always tough, especially for Eklund, who's in his first full NHL season, to actually manage to keep your morale up in a full 82-game season. Even if your team is actually winning a lot of games, getting through the grind of 82 games over like a 5 to 6 month period is always going to be quite difficult and quite an adjustment for these players who had previously been playing in leagues that did not play nearly as many games and not nearly as condensed as the NHL season does. But on top of the fact that the Sharks are also losing the majority of these games, which will only hurt morale and just general emotions, it's definitely quite difficult when you get to this dip in the midway part of the season, games 40, 50, and Eklund has definitely been a victim to that. Hopefully he can sort of finish off the season strong as we get down to the trade deadline, the last month and a half or so of the year, and this is a good start to that. When it comes to the other 2 players on this line, Cunnin I didn't find to be super noticeable. This is honestly a bit of a trend for Cunnin when playing on this second line with Eklund and currently with Filip Zadina as well. Cunnin has been an okay complementary player, but he's not exactly a driving force on this line at all. And then when it comes to Zadina, he definitely had a few really good shifts. I will for sure give him that. It wasn't super consistent, not quite at the level of William Eklund, but I'd say like a 6 on 10, maybe 7 on 10, though that's slightly a stretch there to say. For Zadina, pretty decent. When it comes to the third line, these were the major victims, I would say, of how this game actually went. Because of the fact that this game was so heavily special teams based, the players who do not feature prominently on the power play, so are not on the first power play unit, and the players who do not feature prominently on the penalty kill, had their ice time suffer significantly. And this is immediately apparent when you take a look at the ice times of both Labanc and Barabanov. While both of those players do find themselves on the second power play unit, much of the time for San Jose was on the first power play unit, since half the time they would just score with it, as we see by their 3 power play goals. And so rarely did these 2 players actually get to experience any sort of power play ice time, and of course neither of them play the penalty kill either. And so the even strength shifts were very rare for these 2 players, and so it's quite difficult to evaluate exactly how they performed here tonight. In the few minutes that they got, it was not particularly impressive, which could also compound a reasoning for David Quinn to not want to give them the consistent even strength shifts as we got to the latter parts of this game, the last 10 minutes where there really weren't too many penalties called at that point. So that's definitely one thing, but at the same time, it's very difficult to get into a groove when you're sitting on the bench for 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time, which was a frequency position here for both of these players, so I won't fault them too hard on that. Nico Sturm, on the other hand, as a penalty killer, he did still get a decent amount of minutes here tonight. I actually thought he did a relatively decent job on the penalty kill. Yes, of course, the Sharks gave up 2 power play goals. That's not a great thing, even if they had 5 penalties, so that's about a 60% penalty kill. Not terrible, awful, but clearly not very good either. But I think Sturm did a decent enough job there. And then when it comes to the fourth line, very similar things here. Carpenter does play the penalty kill a bit, so he ends up just barely cresting the 10-minute mark. But Justin Bailey doesn't get the power play time, doesn't really get the penalty killing time either, so his ice time suffered. The only player on this line who actually got decent minutes was Mike Hoffman, who was actually placed on the first power play unit here tonight, as the Sharks decided to go from the 4 forwards, 1 defenseman that they were running last game with Henry Thrun on the back end to now a 5 forward formation. Now, technically, from an offensive standpoint, that did pan out with these 3 goals that they managed to score, though from a defensive standpoint, it was definitely rather shaky. They give up a shorthanded goal, and Hoffman is the player who is back defending in that situation. And the defensive effort from Mike Hoffman in this play, and actually a couple of other times as well, defending and having to skate backwards, was pitiful, and that is even putting it nicely. There was very little effort actually from Hoffman in those situations, which was kind of sad to watch, but is, I guess, a consequence of running a 5 forward unit. Obviously, Granlund being back there is slightly more defensive responsible, but not quite at the level that you would get from an actual defenseman. So it was a very good example of the give and take that you have when you're running that 5 forward power play unit. Moving on to the defense, we have the top pairing of Emberson and Ferraro, but Emberson, for like the 5th time this season, he seems to be extremely injury prone. He gets injured around the first period, only played about 6 minutes of ice time here tonight, and so the Sharks having to run with 5 defensemen for the majority of the night. I don't know exactly how severe the injury to Ty Emberson is. Hopefully he is back soon, but as I mentioned, he has been in and out of the lineup many times thus far this season, so it's not really that much of a surprise to see it happen yet again. Prior to the injury, I thought Emberson was actually playing rather well, and his defensive partner Mario Ferraro as on top of that. And as we carried further on into this game, Ferraro actually did keep up that somewhat solid level of performance. The issues that the Sharks had defensively actually stemmed from the Sharks' second defensive pairing, which is somewhat sad to see, because prior to the All-Star / bye week that the Sharks had, back in the mid parts of January, late parts of December, the Thrun-Ruta pairing was actually one of the better ones, if not the best one, for the San Jose Sharks, and they have fallen and have just not been really good over these last couple of games. Thrun has been mishandling the puck many times. Pucks have been bobbling off of his stick, just doesn't seem entirely focused on things. I don't know if maybe he's playing through an injury. That was something that did occur a couple of weeks ago, and we know he returned from that. You never know if he might still be dealing with a lingering issue. It'd be very silly, I would say, for the Sharks to actually play him through an injury at this point of the season, but you never know if that might be the case, just to try and find some sort of excuse for him. But for Jan Ruda, there really isn't that much of an excuse, and then you see him in the last couple of minutes of the third period go for a keep-in at the blue line and just absolutely fumble it, which allows a Anaheim Ducks player to get essentially a breakaway in such a do-or-die position of a game. That just cannot be allowed to happen at that point. And it was very much just a microcosm of the type of game that the Sharks were getting from this second pairing. So not very good, and you could see that their ice time, even in a game in which the Sharks had a defenseman injured for the majority of it, did somewhat suffer. Usually you would expect Thrun to be up at 20 plus minutes. He didn't even hit that. And then when it comes to the third defensive pairing, we have a Hutchuk and Burrows. Now, these guys struggled somewhat-ish, I would say, in the previous game against the New Jersey Devils. They were definitely a bit better here tonight against Anaheim. Hutchuk actually contributing a decent bit offensively, which was quite nice to see. Burrows didn't make too much of an impact on the game, but maybe that's a good thing for the type of defenseman that he is. So not a terrible game for the third pairing. But speaking of terrible games, we get to the goaltender for the San Jose Sharks, Kaapo Kähkönen. Now, he has been really solid for San Jose throughout the majority of this season. Through all the defensive issues that the Sharks have had, their goaltending has not been a big problem for the team. But over these last couple of games, Kähkönen has let in a ton of goals, and many of them have been of the particularly ugly variety. The 5-hole goals, of which 2 of them were scored here tonight, never look good for a goaltender, and the fact that you let in 2 of them in one game is not a very good look. I even tweeted out here tonight that Kähkönen is seemingly trying to lower his trade value so that the Sharks are unable to trade him before the deadline and are forced to keep him. I don't know if he's bought property in San Jose that he wants to continue living here or anything, but he's clearly playing his way out of an actual high profile type of trade to be able to make it to the playoffs at some point this season, because if I'm a GM watching these last couple of games, I'm not really jumping out of my seat to pick this player up. So hopefully that's not going to tank his trade value too much. It would be very impactful for the Sharks to actually be able to get some extra assets from one of their 2 goaltenders, but now with Blackwood on the IR, Kähkönen not playing well, I don't know if any of them can actually get moved at this point. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. They will head on to the road and they'll be facing off against the Dallas Stars in Game 59 of the regular season. The Sharks will be facing the Dallas Stars for the first time. That's definitely a bit of an oddity of the schedule, but they will be facing off against former San Jose Sharks Joe Pavelski, which is always a very fun time, and we shall see if the Sharks can take down such a tough and strong team. Class dismissed.